The conference room felt like a holding cell, every word from WDE snapping into place like another steel bar around me as he tore into my proposal, calling it trash and questioning whether I'd even researched before wasting everyone's time. His voice echoing while I stood at the front with my slides glowing behind me and 22 pairs of eyes. The board, regional managers, executives, watching in silence, no one stepping in as I tried to speak and was cut off while he stood, accused the company of lowering standards by promoting people like me, waved my printed proposal and mocked its projections, asking if I thought they were all incompetent. My heart slamming as I thought of the 3 weeks of nights and weekends I'd spent preparing only to be dismantled publicly, warned we'd lose millions, and asked if I wanted to bankrupt the company with my stupidity, the room shifting uncomfortably as the clock showed only 15 minutes had passed in a 2-hour meeting, and he continued, telling me I wasn't an innovator or a leader, barely qualified to be there, stepping closer and asking what I even brought to the company, the minutes stretching past an hour as his attack spread to every project I'd touched, dredging up old mistakes, questioning my education and intelligence until he slammed the table and called me completely useless. 75 minutes of humiliation hanging heavy as I took a slow breath, met the scattered gazes, and calmly asked if he was finished. His surprise giving me space to say I wanted to address the real numbers. His protests ending the meeting abruptly, everyone filing out while I gathered my things, and he stormed away unaware that I'd been documenting everything for months, and that tomorrow would change everything. A warning to never underestimate someone pushed too far, because my name is Alice Kwan, and until 6 months ago I was a senior project developer at Trinity Innovations, once excited by its reputation and growth, before learning too late about Wade Barrett, the golden boy whose success came with casualties, women who'd quit before me, HR's casual excuses, the clear pattern of charm upward and cruelty downward, all beginning with the first time I suggested a simple improvement in a meeting and watched him smile. He actually smiled before responding. That's an interesting theory from someone who's been here all of 5 minutes. When you understand how things really work here, then maybe your input will matter. The room went silent, my face burning as I nodded and pretended to jot something down, as if I'd received useful feedback instead of a public dismissal, and that moment set the tone for everything that followed, as small critiques grew into open contempt, him cutting me off in meetings, giving me impossible deadlines, then attacking my work as rushed and careless, leaving me off critical emails, and later reprimanding me for not knowing information I'd never been given. And I wasn't alone because there was Nina in marketing whose campaign ideas were taken and then criticized. Danielle in finance passed over for promotion 3 times despite flawless reviews, and Jeremy, the only male assistant, whom Wade mocked by calling the secretary despite his MBA and technical expertise, and we all stayed for different reasons: money, pride, refusal to be chased out, until for me it became something else entirely, when 3 months into the job I visited my grandmother May in the hospital, a woman who'd built an empire from a single shop in the 1970s into quiet, powerful investments, who listened as I vented about Wade and calmly said I could find another job, any company would want me, and I told her that was exactly what he wanted, to break people until they left so he could replace them. And she studied me with sharp eyes and asked what I planned to do, and I said I wanted real consequences, not a slap on the wrist, and she nodded and quoted her mother's saying about the patient hunter creating a path for the prey, explaining that sometimes the strongest response wasn't leaving or fighting back, but waiting and shaping the right conditions, even when I admitted I wasn't sure I had that patience. And she took my hand and told me I was more like her than I realized, and asked me to tell her everything about Wade and Trinity, every detail, a conversation that changed everything as over the following months. While her health faded, we spoke often about him, the company's structure, the other victims, and she asked questions I'd never considered, explaining that companies protect people like him because they deliver results, and that real change requires leverage, not just proof of bad behavior, but something that threatens what the company values most. And 2 weeks before she died, she had me bring my laptop so she could dictate an email to her attorney, telling me only that it was insurance for both of us. And after she passed, I buried myself in work, altered by grief and purpose, watching Wade differently, seeing how he managed perceptions, built alliances, isolated targets, and I began keeping records, recording meetings, saving emails and screenshots, compiling timelines involving others, until the day of the board presentation when my proposal to restructure client onboarding would either establish me or give Wade the excuse to eliminate me. And while I knew which outcome he expected, I didn't know, not until my phone rang at 7:15 the next morning, exactly what my grandmother had put in motion, as an unknown number introduced himself as Robert Chen, her attorney of 30 years, calling to open what she called my contingency package, scheduled precisely 3 months after her death, unless I contacted him using a specific phrase. And when he told me the phrase, "Are you finished?" the room seemed to tilt, because those were the exact words I'd said to Wade the day before, and 2 hours later, I sat in a sleek downtown law office as Robert spread documents across his desk and began, "Trinity Innovations is owned by Ascendant Capital Group. Your grandmother began acquiring shares in Ascendant 15 years ago through various holding companies, and by the time of her passing, she controlled nearly 12%, making her estate one of the largest minority shareholders," Robert said, and I struggled to absorb it because my grandmother didn't just work near my company, she owned part of it, had even served on Ascendant's advisory board through a proxy for the last decade with a particular focus on corporate culture. And Robert slid a folder toward me containing every complaint filed against Wade Barrett over 8 years, 36 women and 12 men who had formally complained or cited him as their reason for leaving, with settlements paid to 11 former employees. And when I asked why he was still protected, Robert answered simply, "Numbers," explaining that Wade's department outperformed projections by 20%, and the CEO considered the payouts acceptable, though my grandmother did not, as another folder revealed financial analyses proving Wade's success came from a pattern of pushing talented people to the brink, stealing credit, and forcing them out before they could establish themselves, his department succeeding despite him. Not because of him, a truth hidden by powerful allies on the board, until my phone buzzed with a text from HR summoning me to a meeting, right on schedule, as Robert smiled and explained that board members aligned with my grandmother's estate had already called an emergency session, reviewed built-in conference room recordings from yesterday, along with my performance data and complaint histories, leaving me lightheaded as he handed me an envelope containing my grandmother's instructions, which I read privately in the bathroom, as she wrote that Wade's public cruelty had been inevitable, that I now had a choice between the easy path of his termination or the harder path of systemic change, one that required courage and transformation rather than destruction. And at 10:30, I entered the same conference room to face the CEO, HR director, and board members, proposing her plan and watching their sympathy turn to stunned interest, as I reminded them that unprecedented solutions were required for unprecedented harm, leading to Wade being summoned to HR and later appearing at my desk, shaken, asking to talk, flinching when I repeated the words, "Are you finished?" and admitting he hadn't known who I was connected to, only for me to tell him that was exactly the point, as he revealed the board had given him a choice to leave immediately or accept a role reporting to a new division, because they weren't questioning his output anymore, they were questioning the human cost of his leadership. Workplace culture and accountability? This is insane. I'm the highest performing manager in the company. "Are you?" I replied. "Or do you just take credit for other people's work before forcing them out?" His face reddened as I continued, telling him that Nana's award-winning marketing campaign had been hers from the start, dismissed by him as pedestrian before he presented the same idea to the board, that Jeremy's client management system, Saving Millions, had been mocked as amateur and then unveiled as his own innovation, and when he claimed I couldn't prove it, I told him it was all documented, every stolen idea, every person driven away, every lie, before moving toward the door and laying out his choice: leave with nothing or join the new division and learn what real leadership looked like. A trainee role after 15 years that he called humiliating, to which I answered that it was no more humiliating than what he'd done to me yesterday or to dozens of others, giving him until morning to decide and ignoring his attempt to bargain as I walked away, spending a sleepless night wondering if I'd gone too far or not far enough until Robert called at 6 a.m. to say Wade had accepted, choosing money over pride to keep his bonuses and stock options. And by Monday, the new workplace culture and accountability division launched. Wade finding his corner office gone, his new desk across from mine with a binder of exit interviews, a phone, and instructions to call every former employee and listen without defending himself. His protests silenced by the cost of refusal. The board approving unanimously as I became his supervisor, handing him performance metrics like the ones he'd once used on me, watching his hatred flicker as I smiled and told him to start with Nina, the first call draining color from his face, 47 more to go. And as days passed, this unfamiliar form of reckoning unfolded. Wade arriving at 8 sharp, making call after call, some brief and brutal, others long and detailed, his posture shrinking, his voice softening, his confidence eroding as he took notes and stared into space. And I felt both satisfaction and unease knowing this wasn't conventional revenge, but a slow confrontation with consequence, one meant to change the company itself, while somewhere I imagined my grandmother smiling, unaware then that the true test of her plan was still ahead. "Is this really necessary?" he asked after a particularly brutal call with Jeremy, who had left 6 months earlier after Wade took credit for his client management system. "Which part?" I asked. "The public display of all this," he said, gesturing around the open office where his demotion played out in full view. "I could do these calls privately." "The point isn't just for you to hear their stories, Wade," I replied. "It's for you to experience being visible while vulnerable, the same way they were." He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened, and by the third week, whispers spread through the company as people who'd avoided me after the board meeting now stopped by my desk with coffee or lunch, sharing their own quieter stories of harm. Lynn from product describing how she'd redone a presentation 5 times only for Wade to present it as his own. Tyler from engineering recalling how his ideas were dismissed as too emotional before being implemented months later. Always the same pattern of belittle, steal, promote himself. Conversations Wade surely overheard as he stared at his screen, ears burning red. And at our first monthly review, I handed him feedback summaries and a self-assessment form, which he pushed away calling it punishment, only for me to correct him that it was accountability, something he'd never faced, prompting him to accuse me of revenge until I told him that if I wanted revenge, he'd already be unemployed, that this was about change, real and lasting, for the entire company. A belief my grandmother shared, and one that silenced him. Yet by week 6, cracks appeared when I arrived to find Robert waiting with grim news that executives from Wade's former department were pressuring the board, citing a 15% productivity drop and threatening to leave unless Wade was reinstated, a bluff I challenged until Robert admitted 2 had competing offers and the board was wavering, calling a Friday meeting and demanding proof of the program's value after only 6 weeks. Leaving me that night surrounded by notes I couldn't easily turn into numbers when my phone rang, and Nina said she knew about the meeting because Wade had called her, following up on a conversation from weeks earlier. And in that moment I realized the next phase of my grandmother's plan had already begun. He wanted to know if there was anything else I remembered that he should address, which caught me off guard, and at first I wondered if he was fishing for support. But Nana later admitted that while she'd thought the same, he seemed different, asking specific questions about projects where he'd taken credit for her work and actually taking notes, leaving me staring at my phone afterward, unsure what game Wade was playing or whether this was genuine participation or some calculated countermove. And the next day, I noticed his desk was empty, with no meetings on his calendar, a pattern that continued for 3 days as he vanished for hours, returned briefly, then left again, visibly distracted, until Thursday, the day before the board meeting, when I confronted him and asked where he'd been, only for him to pull out a thick folder containing a meticulous analysis of every project his department had completed over 5 years, documenting original creators, team contributions, and his own often minimal input. And as I flipped through the pages, stunned by how thorough and damaging it was, he corrected me that he wasn't documenting his theft, but the truth, admitting that after 47 phone calls hearing the same story about himself, he'd had to face what he'd become, and that this wasn't to save himself, but to help the people whose work he'd taken, even knowing he was giving up the perception that protected him, confessing how exhausting it was to maintain the lies. And when my phone buzzed with Robert's message moving the board meeting up to 8 a.m. the next day, I told Wade we didn't have much time and realized that if he was serious, it was us now, leading to a surreal night working side by side until midnight, organizing the documentation and preparing our presentation, where he finally admitted his behavior had been driven by fear of being exposed as not good enough. And the next morning, the board meeting began tensely as the complaining executives smugly raised concerns about productivity, until Wade stood before I could speak, and, with the CEO's cautious approval, laid out 8 years of deception in painstaking detail, naming names, citing projects, and crediting 48 people whose work had been stolen or silenced, declaring it theft rather than leadership, and leaving the room stunned, executives pale and scrambling before he urged the board to finally hear my original proposal, not just about client onboarding, but about transforming how the company valued contribution. And as he sat down, I felt the energy shift as skeptical board members leaned forward with genuine interest. The CEO's expression shifted from impatience to thoughtful consideration as I presented my original proposal, now enriched with data from the workplace culture and accountability program. I detailed how recognizing individual contributions while promoting genuine collaboration could elevate productivity far beyond what WDE's department had achieved through fear and theft. When I finished, the CEO turned to the 3 executives who had lodged complaints. They exchanged uneasy glances, one finally saying, "We would need time to review these claims." Before further debate could ensue, the silver-haired board member who had backed my grandmother's plan spoke. "I think we've heard enough," she said. "I move that we continue the program as established and implement Ms. Kwan's restructuring proposal immediately." The vote was unanimous. As the meeting concluded, Wade approached me. "Was this what your grandmother intended all along?" I thought of May's letter and replied, "True power isn't in destruction, it's in transformation. I think she hoped for change. Even she, though, couldn't have foreseen this exact outcome." 1 year later, Trinity Innovations was featured in a business magazine article titled "Culture Correction: How One Company Transformed Toxic Leadership into Collaborative Success." The piece highlighted our restructured departments, transparent attribution policies, and markedly improved retention rates. Wade completed the program and accepted a position as a regular team member, no corner office, no special title, contributing thoughtfully and never again taking credit for another's work. While some employees never fully trusted him, most came to respect his commitment to change. I was promoted to head the Permanent Workplace Culture Division, reporting directly to the board. The client onboarding system I had originally proposed, the one Wade had dismissed as garbage, was rolled out company-wide, increasing client satisfaction by 42%. My grandmother's attorney, Robert, now sits on Trinity's board representing her estate's interests, and together we've helped 3 other companies implement similar accountability programs. The most meaningful validation came 6 months after that pivotal board meeting. A young developer nervously approached my office, clutching her laptop. "I have an idea," she said, "but I'm afraid to present it. What if someone takes it?" I smiled and gestured to the framed quote on my wall. My grandmother's words. True power isn't in destruction, it's in transformation. That won't happen here, I assured her. Not anymore. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like and subscribe. Have you ever witnessed a workplace transformation, personal or organizational? Share your experience in the comments below. Remember, change often begins with one person brave enough to ask, "Are you finished?" Your story might be the catalyst someone else needs to find their voice.